And then we work with our allies to have this system become the dominant financial system in the world.
Right.
Sovereign nations. Everything is based on sovereign nations.
Right.
Now, in that regard, I noted with some interest that a former president of Shell Oil in the U.S., which is a unit of Royal Dutch Shell, the company of the
other half
queens
of the Anglo-Dutch oligarchy.
Yeah. And he made the statement that he was complaining that the U.S. government is expecting unlimited liability from BP for this spill. And he said at some point BP has got to start protecting itself, even if it means going against the government. Mm-hmm. You know, this is a very clear example of this imperial arrogance. And, you know, this whole idea that the imperial companies and the imperial operations are above nation states.
Sure.
And they will tolerate government interference to a certain extent. But they will, if it goes too far, no, we're not going to go along.
I wouldn't be surprised in that context to see BP seek bankruptcy protection to saddle American taxpayers with the totality of the cost of this absolute disaster that they've created. And again, I'm convinced that at least after the explosion occurred, that there has been a willful policy, BP being an arm of the British monarchy and the British City of London oligarchy. I'm convinced that this is all absolutely intentional. It's doing it on the cheap, but well beyond that. They had an indication all along about the magnitude of this crisis. And they've lied consistently. They know that they can get away with it because they've got a British agent in the Oval Office who's going to huff and puff and make postures. But when push comes to shove, he's done nothing whatsoever other than reject the one option that was clearly on the table right at the outset, which was to blow this thing through a PNE, use a shaped charge to shut this whole well. And had that been done in the first days and weeks, we'd be having a very different conversation about this today. But that's not the nature of Obama as a president. No British agent sitting in the White House in this political context would dare to take the kind of action that a real American president would necessarily take.
Yeah, well, imperial policy has always been you go into an area that has raw materials that you want. You only put in enough infrastructure to allow you to efficiently take those raw materials.
That's right.
And then after you've gotten what you want, you leave and leave it for the locals to clean up the mess.
That's right.
You know, and that's what we see. We've seen that all out through Africa. We've seen that everywhere. You look at Nigeria in oil right now. You see that very clearly. Mm-hmm. And now it's happening in the Gulf, and they're doing the same thing.
That's right.
They're not going to pay for it. The BP can be sacrificed as a corporate shell. Sure. But the empire right now, the empire is completely bankrupt. They need the money. They need the money desperately, and they're still going to extract everything they can out of this and leave the hulk. It's like leaving some of these big dead banks. They're going to suck all the money out and then leave the hulk, dying hulk, for the governments to deal with. Sure. Because fundamentally, they're looking to protect themselves, and they don't really care about the environment, about the people of the world, about anything else. They care about themselves and maintaining their own power.
And they want to kill a lot of people.
They want to kill people.
They've got a body count policy. John, I want to just mention one other thing, just to give people a kind of a sneak preview. I know that LPAC TV is working at breakneck speed on what I think is going to be one of the most important and informative documentaries to ever come out on the question of this financial collapse. And it was in part triggered by this debate up in Brookline, Massachusetts between Rachel Brown and Barney Frank, because on the issue of Glass-Steagall, Barney Frank lied through his teeth and claimed that he had voted against the repeal of Glass-Steagall back in 1999. Well, that was a rigged game. So whether or not, in fact, he did cast a vote at one point against it. Today, where the most pressing issue on the table is the reinstating of Glass-Steagall, Barney Frank killed that off. He's chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. He would not allow even an amendment proposing Glass-Steagall to be seriously taken up in the House version of this bill. And he's one of the people that Wall Street and London rely on above all others to make sure that there is no return to a regulated financial system, meaning Glass-Steagall, and a ban on derivatives, because a return to a fixed exchange rate system internationally eliminates the need for hedging and the justification for derivatives. But I know that what's being prepared is an incredible account of how it was that Glass-Steagall was eliminated in the first place. And it wasn't something that occurred in 1999. It was a 15-year process that was launched by the British crown jewel of Wall Street, J.P. Morgan. And what we're going to see is that the pivotal figure, without whose involvement it could have never happened, was none other than Alan Greenspan.
Yeah, Sir Alan, I believe.
That's right,
yes.
exactly. He was at J.P. Morgan as a director in 1984 when an internal pamphlet or document was produced called Rethinking Glass-Steagall, which basically said, we've got to tear this law down and get back to Wild West London-style banking, where you have commercial banking, investment banking, insurance, everything under one roof, where you can commingle all those operations and know that ultimately the taxpayers are going to come in to bail you out if you lose at the gambling table.
And to quote Sarah Palin's question, how's that working out for you?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
I mean, you had, this whole process was playing out. The Federal Reserve started easing the rules. Now, there's some disagreement as to whether or not they had any actual legal right to do this, but clearly, if you look at it from a constitutional standpoint, from our standpoint, they had no right to do this.
Right.
This is an imperial central banking apparatus overriding U.S. law.
That's right.
And they started relaxing the rules to let J.P. Morgan get more involved in the securities business as a way of getting the foot in the door. And they gradually opened it up and expanded it and expanded it and expanded it to the point where you had this Travelers Corporation, this very shady operation run by Sandy Weil, who has a nice history with people like Felix Rohatyn and Kenneth Bjorken. And so they launch a bid to buy Citicorp. Now, under federal conspiracy laws, just making that announcement is a crime.
Right.
Because you have two groups getting together to announce that they're going to break federal law.
Right, because Glass-Steagall was still in full force.
It's the law of the land.
Exactly.
I mean, they could say whatever they want, but it was law. And what was the response of Congress? I remember this vividly, that the response of Congress, the response of Washington was, oh, we'd better change the law. If the banks want to do this, we're not going to stop them. We're going to change the law so they can.
Right.
It was a complete capitulation. I look back in the 1990s when you had Henry B. Gonzalez of Texas as the chairman of the House Banking Committee, who would fight these guys.
Yep.
And he was out attacking the derivatives market. He was doing all he could do. It was a rear guard action because the bankers were running the show even then, but he was fighting. And then you compare that to this twit, Barney Frank.
Exactly.
Who just gives them whatever they want. Oh, you want that? Sure. Let me try to spin it so it looks like I'm not just giving away the store.
Right.
But that's the process that's going on here. And now you see this enormous exposure in real estate. The only way to pay for all of this stuff is fascism, is austerity. You see the same thing going on in Europe. The demands on the European governments to impose austerity budgets that will basically kill their people, that the empire is demanding, telling the governments, you start killing your own people in order to make sure we get our money.
Right. In the 1920s and 1930s, this was widely referred to as Schachtian economics, after Hjalmar Schacht, who was ultimately Hitler's finance minister and controller, and the guy who shaped the economic policies of Nazi Germany that led lawfully to the concentration camps.
And Ben Bernanke has a picture of Schacht on his wall.
Right, exactly.
In his office.
Exactly, exactly.